Hello guys, welcome to Amateur Hour. Today, I record half of this video before I ever hit the record button. Yeah. What is up guys? So today we're actually going to be taking a look at Bronzong in terms of how he does in the Nightmare Cup. And there are a couple of interesting points about Bronzong that kind of make him a little bit more unique in this cup. I could say almost as unique in the Kingdom Cup, if not just a tiny bit more, maybe? I don't know. I'll let you guys decide that. So, Bronzong is actually a Steel and Psychic type Pokemon, maxing out at level 40 with 15s across the board at 2239. Pretty respectable CP there. Pretty good CP if you're thinking about using it for the Ultra League as well. Maxing out at a 2239 is pretty sweet. You can actually achieve a 1497 at level 25.5 if you have a 1 on attack, 15 defense, and 14 stamina there, as that IV spread does yield you the highest stat product available while being under 1500 CP. According to my numbers and my spreadsheets and all the stuff that I have done, Bronzong does rank 5th in bulk and 4th in stat products, so very respectable numbers there in terms of all the participants. Ranking that high is a pretty good feat. Moving on to our moves here, we do actually have all of our moves color-coded for stab effect, and I do actually have those stab numbers written here. Hopefully they're getting a little bit more legible as I'm trying to get used to how to space everything out. Our first fast attack is actually Feint Attack, which is 3 energy per turn for 3 damage per turn. Of course, with no stab effect, that does end up meaning it's not that enticing. Confusion definitely is the more enticing move here. For the same energy per turn with a 4 damage per turn, and then after you factor in stab, you're actually going to be doing 4.8 damage per turn, which is even better. Moving on to our charge moves, we do have Flash Cannon here, which costs 65 for 110 damage at a 1.69 ratio there. Pretty respectable. When we factor in stab, we actually bump up to a 132 on the damage with our highest damage per energy ratio move here at 2.03. So very good damage. Next, we actually move on to Psychic here, costing 70 for 100 damage at a 1.43 damage per energy ratio. When factoring in stab though, it does go up to 120 damage with a 1.71 damage per energy ratio. Last but not least, we do round off with Heavy Slam here, costing 50 for 70 damage at a 1.4 damage per energy ratio. Not the best in terms of our ratio there, but it definitely ends up being our quickest charge move, which is definitely a big benefit. After factoring in stab, you do hit 84 damage for a 1.68 damage per energy ratio. So, pretty respectable moveset here. It's not too shabby. Definitely the better moveset to go with, in my opinion, is Confusion. Flash Cannon and Heavy Slam is kind of like meh. I mean, if you really want Flash Cannon, you can, but honestly, Heavy Slam is kind of there to spam, and then Flash Cannon is there if you want it to just really drive home those hard-hitting moves whenever your opponent doesn't have any shields remaining. But here's an interesting tidbit. I do think there could be a case to actually using Feint Attack over Confusion in this cup. Now, this is all in theory. None of this is set in practice. I'd be interested to test it if I had the TMs. In the moveset where you have Confusion, Flash Cannon, and Heavy Slam, by the way, I did also try factoring in Psychic here into several different scenarios. None of them really helped it. Psychic just, it's kind of meh. Doesn't really get you any higher of a ratio in terms of your win percentages. It's just kind of there. But if you were to actually factor in Feint Attack to help cover a lot of the Psychics in the cup that actually end up resisting Confusion, it could actually, you could kind of gear your Bronzong towards a specific set of Pokemon while being able to resist a lot of the Psychic damage pretty heavily. So it would make it kind of interesting in terms of if you needed a flat out like Psychic killer, you could definitely use Feint Attack while resisting a lot of that damage based on your typing and then doing a lot of neutral damage in return. I think that could work in certain scenarios, but in general, I think most people are going to favor the Confusion, Flash Cannon, Heavy Slam combo there I think that's what you're most widely going to see if you go to a cup and see Bronzong. I think that's really safe to bet on C. Now moving on to our shield situations here. So we actually start with a 0 versus 0 shield situation, which is 38.8%. So in the scenario where we actually end up being the closer type Pokemon, 38.8% is pretty respectable. Not the highest that we've seen, but definitely not the lowest. Next, we actually move on to our 2 versus 0 situation. So when I have 2 shields and my opponent has 0 shields, how many of those matches do we win? Well, we actually end up winning 89.6% of those. But the wins aren't what's important there. We definitely want to pay attention to what we lose to, because when we have the complete advantage when it comes to shields, I want to know what Pokemon are just going to flat out beat us. And things that are dark types here really do shine. So things like Houndoom, Skuntank, Drapion, Sharpedo, Umbreon, Alolan Raticate, Mightyena, all those Pokemon end up having really favorable matchups against us. So we have to really pay attention to going up against a lot of the dark types, whether we have shields or not. Next, we actually end up going to our 0 versus 2 shield situation, which is where I have no shields and my opponent ends up having 2 shields, and it's kind of the opposite of our previous. We want to figure out which Pokemon we actually can just end up always beating, no matter how much advantage they end up having when it comes to the shield situation. We actually only end up winning 19.4% of those, but it's important that a lot of those matchups come from the fighting type. While not all of that 19% is comprised of the fighting type, a lot of them are. We actually only end up losing to 5 of the fighting types, and we end up tying against 2 of them, so depending on how you look at that situation, I consider that a loss because I lost my Pokemon. But Hariyama, Monferno are your 2 ties, while Heracross, Machamp, Combusken, Hitmontop, and Lucario are all of the losses. Now, out of those 5 losses, I definitely think that Machamp and Lucario are more likely to be seen in your local metas. Combusken and Hitmontop, I don't think too many people are looking at those already. But Heracross could be kind of common if he's already common in your area. I definitely foresee people using him. He does have a pretty unique tool set that I think some people can get behind, but it would definitely be worth noting those matchups if you're going to be using Bronzong with this moveset so that you can kind of foresee those matches. Otherwise, if you don't see those Pokemon, you're okay to just throw your Pokemon out there and you know you've got it. Our last situation here is our 2 shields versus 2 shields situation, which is actually kind of like our opener situation. We actually end up winning 49.3% of those, so that's pretty good. So you can kind of see with these 2 numbers, 38.8 versus 49.3, Bronzong definitely favors to be an opener in this situation. He definitely likes to have those shields. He likes to put his damage into a shield, kind of spam around with this heavy slam a little bit, maybe throw in some flash cannon action, get some damage rolling, but he definitely does prefer to be an opener based on these matchup percentages here. So now let's actually move on to some matchups and kind of see what Bronzong is really supposed to be used for. And keep in mind that all of the scenarios from this point beyond into the video have been done with a 1 versus 1 shield situation, just to kind of give some fairness to both sides, because if you're honestly going to use 2 shields on a Pokemon, you're probably at a disadvantage when it comes to typing or anything like that anyways. So when it comes to our matchups here, we actually end up going toe-to-toe with the top 10 bulkiest Pokemon in the cup. It's just something that I like to do. I like to throw these Pokemon up against the top 10 bulkiest. Considering that Bronzong is number 5, I did not choose to put him into this, because if you really wanted to, you could just use Feint Attack, beat it, and that's kind of the way PvPoke looks at it. So scratching out Bronzong here and actually filling in with the number 11th bulkiest Pokemon, which is actually Poliwrath, we actually get a pretty interesting spread here. So Wobbuffet, Slowking, and Poliwrath all end up being favorable matchups for us. We actually end up winning all 3 of those matchups pretty easily. Not too much trouble there. It's just kind of sad that it's only 3 out of the top 10 bulkiest. So on the flip side, something that I thought was interesting was we beat Slowking, but we lose to Slowbro. Slowbro and Slowking do share identical stats, so it really just comes down to moves. While Slowking and the Slowbro matchup are a little different here, even though Slowking actually ends up having favorable moves towards Bronzong and actually ends up having Fire Blast, if I'm not mistaken. It's just too slow. It doesn't have enough speed to really get over the neutral damage that these two charge moves are going to be able to output towards Slowking. Slowbro, being that it ties, it is a little faster, even though it doesn't have super effective charge moves. It would end up winning if we had maybe a different set of charge moves, something that was a little bit more super effective towards Bronzong. Unfortunately though, they are split. Interesting nonetheless. So in terms of what we just flat out lose against, we actually lose against Umbreon. Hypno is a tie. Claydol, Alolan Raticate, Matang, which is also a tie, and Grumpig also enters this list as well. So kind of interesting because Umbreon's Dark, we can understand that Dark is going to be really good up against Bronzong. Alolan Raticate falls into that same scenario, but Hypno's a tie, Claydol wins, and Grumpig wins. So I really got to thinking, like, why did those two win when they don't even have Confusion? Like, it's not even like they're going toe-to-toe with Confusion or anything. So I started to dig, and it really starts to show up right here. So moving on to our counter situation, what should we actually be focusing our attention on when we're using Bronzong versus what should we actually be focusing attention on when we're trying to counter Bronzong? So when we're actually trying to use Bronzong, I think that you want to target the fighters. Of course, in a 1 versus 1 shield situation, the only fighter that we end up even tying against is Lucario. Everything else is a done deal. Pretty easy. Now, when it comes to the Psychics, it gets really awkward here. So what I have written down is that for the positive side, things that don't have a resistance actually end up going pretty well for us. The problem is that when those Pokemon don't have super effective moves to come back at us, that's where they start to falter. So we start to win a few of these Psychic type matchups because they do resist our confusion damage, but they don't have anything to deal super effective back to us, if that makes sense. If they're only dealing neutral damage, Bronzong's highly resisted psychic damage is going to be able to withstand more, and it's going to be able to output a lot of neutral damage. If they don't have anything that's even remotely neutral, we will just simply outpace them when it comes to resistance. Now, on the flip side of that, what we lose to, Psychic is here again. And I have Awkward squared because it gets a little bit more weird here. So, things that can resist confusion still show up in this list, but it's whenever they can resist non-resisted damage back to us. That's why Claydol and Grumpig end up showing up here, because Claydol has access to Earthquake, if I'm not mistaken. Grumpig has access to Shadow Ball. So you start to see that these small things that they can kind of throw at us that are super effective starts to win them a lot of these matchups. On the other side, though, we do still end up losing to a ton of these dark types, which is really... Absol, Alolan Muck, and Honchkrow are some of the more preferred matchups for us, but even then, like, it's abysmal. Like, they end up winning with, like, 50 or 60% health. Like, it's a pretty dry cut kind of deal. Dark types are a no-go for Bronzong. It's a hard counter for us. Last thing that we want to talk about here is a few pros and cons. And this one was honestly pretty hard to think up some pros and cons to talk about. But I did come up with at least one each here. So our only con that I actually have is that we do pretty much get wrecked by a lot of the dark types. I don't think necessarily that Bronzong and Spiritomb would be a good fit on some teams. Like, if you're going to have two Pokemon that just get completely wrecked by dark types, you're going to have really, really high damage output fighting types to combat that. I think that Bronzong's weakness towards the dark types in general really makes him kind of awkward to pair up against. Like, I mean, I understand that the rock, paper, scissors thing is going to make all psychic types pretty much weak to the dark typing, but I think there are a little bit better options in some of the other psychic types out there that could help with, you know, some dark type matchups. It's really awkward. Like, maybe Gallade would be a little different. Just off the top of my head, Gallade comes to mind. But I definitely think that it's more awkward to pair Bronzong with someone that's also going to be really hard off up against dark types. Like, he's pretty bad off. Like, he doesn't win a lot of the dark types. He doesn't win any of the dark types. Like, none of them. In a 1v1 shield situation, he doesn't win a single dark. Yeah, Alolan Grimer is the closest he gets to winning. And by PB Poke's battle rating, it's a 274 battle rating, which is insane. Even if we have shield advantage, we can win against the Alolan Grimer, but I mean, it's still like we're going to be barely hanging on even with shield advantage. 20 health left. So pretty hard matchups up against the dark types there. So we can get pretty wrecked by those. But to counter that point, on the positive sides, we kind of are oddly balanced here. So if you actually look at the 1v1 shield situations histogram on PvPoke, you can actually see that there are a couple of bumps in the list. And you can kind of see down towards like the 250 mark, you see this big spike. That's all of your dark matchups right there. All of those dark matchups end up hitting in that 250 range. Because we lose so hard to them, we start to really falter, and a lot of that battle rating area, that's where those dark types happen. Now, also, you'll see a small spike around the 500 mark, and that's because when we talk about these psychics here, we are awkward against some of them, but we're even more awkward against the other half, and the other half that we lose to ends up being slight losses and slight wins. So the psychic type matchups are kind of right there in the middle around that 500. And then the last bump that you have is this kind of close to like 675, like 700, maybe 750 area. You'll see this other little bump, and you kind of get the idea that that's where all of these fighters show up. So it's oddly a balanced type Pokemon whenever you look at like his matchup spread. He has very specific areas he loses to darks pretty cleanly. He kind of has some mix matched, you know, psychic matchups in the middle, and he pretty cleanly wins against most of the fightings. So he's oddly pretty balanced in this cup, as opposed to in the Kingdom Cup, where I feel like Bronzong's almost that unsung hero where he does really good up against a lot of different Pokemon. He's almost like, he's like in the back of the crowd, like, hey, I'm good. And then everybody's like, hey, Lucario, come up here. Hey, Lapras, you come. Altaria, yeah. Oh, Bastiodon, oh, y'all get over here. Y'all crowd over here. Like, Bronzong's back there like, hey, guys, don't forget me. You know? But honestly, in the Nightmare Cup, he's pretty even. And he's pretty good, honestly. Like, I don't have a problem suggesting Bronzong can fit really well into some teams. He's definitely a specialist towards the fighting types because of how hard he gets knocked off with the dark types. It is kind of more of a specialist situation. He doesn't have a real broad set of matchups. As you can kind of see in these two numbers, he doesn't even break 50% unless he has complete shield advantage. So he's not really like good against a ton of stuff. But he does have his little niche that he's really good at. So I definitely think that's where you should focus your attention if you're planning on using Bronzong. It's pretty clear cut. If you already have one from last month, it's pretty much a no-brainer. Like, hey, I can save some dust this month and just use this Bronzong again. No problem there. Definitely focus your attention more on the fighters. Pay attention to some of the psychic type matchups. Kind of do a little bit of research on your own. Figure out which ones you definitely are expecting more of in your area, and then just kind of disregard those dark matchups and try to switch as quickly as possible if you go up against a dark type. That's just my take on Bronzong, though. I'd love to hear what you guys think about him down in those comments below. And always remember, if you have an idea for a deep dive, please comment it. I'm keeping tally of all these Pokemon so that whenever it comes up to do another video, whatever's top of the list, we go over it that day. So any votes that you guys end up putting in the comments today will actually go towards the video that we do after Heracross. That's what I said earlier, right? It was Heracross? Yeah, it's Heracross. Anything that you guys want after Heracross will basically be tallied up here. Like I said, on the dock we have Poliwrath, Skuntank, Zatu, and Hypno are the top rated ones right now. Not far behind that are things like Alolan Muk, Alolan Raichu, Gardevoir, Umbreon, Toxicroak, Honchkrow, things like that. So there's plenty of things to be looking forward to in the Nightmare Cup. I'm really excited to be doing a lot more Nightmare Cup stuff. So I do have my Kingdom Cup, that's what it's called. My Kingdom Cup is actually going to be this weekend, so that's going to be interesting. I also pretty much broke my camera today, the tripod screw hole thing, whatever that's called, the mount. It's broken, so hopefully I'll have a camera to film this weekend. If not, guess like I'll be recording on my matches and just doing voiceover, which sucks. But hey, we'll figure it out. We'll get it done. I've already started looking at new cameras. They're way too expensive. It's stupid how expensive cameras are, but you know, what you gonna do? So anyways, I'm rambling at this point. Thank you guys so much for hanging out today. Thank you for listening to me ramble. Remember, if you have any suggestions, put them, go down, like literally just push your scroll wheel. I don't know which way you push it, but go down into the comments, send me a love note. I'd love to hear it. Thank you guys so much for hanging out. What's my outro again? If you like to like videos, make sure you do that. If you don't, you can be that guy. Otherwise, I'm just have to say it down in the comments below. And until our next video, I will catch you then.